This is Siddharth Alwalia. Welcome to the 100x Entrepreneur Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC fund led by Amit Somani, Shripati Acharya, and Sanjay Swami. Prime is often the first institutional investor in category creating tech startups in fintech, SaaS, healthcare, and education, such as Mygate, Neo, and Reco. To know more about Prime, visit primevp.in. Today, I have with me Sajith Pai, director at Blume Ventures. Welcome, Sajith, to the podcast.
Hey Siddharth, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sajith, we would love to know, to start with, because we are in unprecedented times. What does your day look like in lockdown?
Sure, sure. The days are pretty well defined in terms of every single thing is calendarized, and that's actually the unfortunate outcome of the pandemic. That every single thing to a what would have been a random bump in the office or just walking out for chai with someone now has to become a calendar entry. But when you look back, strangely, it's all a blur. Like if you ask me at the end of the day, like how is there, is this day distinct? Every day seems to be like really like the other. So while everything is calendarized and spoken for, I think it's somehow at the end of a week, I really can't. And of course, I mean, if there are exceptional things like some companies gone to a certain stage process or in funding or something, then of course, you say that's a good week or something like that. But otherwise, every week seems like a blur. Every day seems like a blur. So yeah, I don't know if that's the answer we're looking for, but yeah. So there you go.
So, Sajith, now coming to about you, before we proceed into the podcast,
Sure, sure.
I would love to know about your journey to Bloom Ventures. You say you have a very unconventional investor.
Yeah,
Even you give advice that anybody who is looking to
yeah,
become a VC shouldn't contact you at all.
yeah, yeah.
Also, would love to know that how you became a VC and your journey till now.
No, no, absolutely. Uh, so I kind of call myself an accidental VC, and which is the truth. Um, so I'm 45 now, and I can join Bloom for 2 years back, just over 2 years back. Um, so I came from the Times of India group, where I'd worked for nearly 2 decades, and fortunate to get into Bloom because I knew Karthik, who founded Bloom, and Ashish, who's like the third partner in Bloom, reasonably well. We had worked together in Brand Capital, which is a division of the Times which did these ad for equity swaps. And Karthik was my boss there, and Ashish was a colleague. So if it were not for that, and if they didn't have that sense of comfort with me, and they were looking for and Bloom, 2 3 years back, it was just about raising its third fund. Uh, and what had happened over the years from the first fund to the third fund was they were getting deeper and they're playing larger checks. So they needed a certain kind of personality, certain kind of set, not personality, certain set of um, folks who are kind of willing to kind of go a little more deeper, kind of bring in that organizational perspective, etc. So, and I kind of fitted into that. They knew me. I had sense of education. I knew media. So Karthik felt be kind of good for me to be there as kind of a foil for him. And they were looking for depth in research, in thinking, etc. I kind of fitted that bill. So I would say that a lot of those factors came together. It helped that I was willing to kind of come in as a non-partner. So because and a lot of those factors helped. But certainly Karthik knowing me or Ashish knowing me was a big factor, and which is why it's very hard for me to say, like, when people reach out to me and say, how did you make it to Bloom, at the age of 43 or something like that, what is the path for us? So I mean, I would say that, I mean, it's very hard for you to kind of get into a VC firm, I mean, without knowing some folks or without having created a brand for yourself, especially if you're on the, late 30s, early 40s. uh, Someone like me who's been in corporate, did not have like a startup background, I think it's much harder. But my sense is that don't look at me and then try and say that if Sajid can do it, kind of you can, because there's a fair bit of chance and fate there. But yes, certainly to the younger people who reach out to me, I'm happy to give advice, because then, if they're in their 20s or 30s, I certainly give advice, and especially if they're if they have a background in startups, etc., it's much easier. So that's really what I meant. So I hope that answers your query. Yeah.
And what was your decision making framework for yourself to join Bloom, or is it a gut call?
Yeah, so I knew Karthik well. I knew Ashish well. I met Sanjay, and I really liked the team. So they're wonderful people, Karthik, Sanjay, Ashish. Then I met Arpit as well. So the senior team at Bloom came across as very friendly. I felt welcome there. And I had enough awareness of the startup world, VC world, to know what my broad day-to-day job would be. I knew enough about VC. I'd read a lot about it. I had some queries, but and once they were confirmed, I kind of felt that this would be a good experiment for the rest of the next 10, 15 years of my life. The fact is, I was looking to kind of move on from Times because I was you worked 2 decades in a company. I've worked across multiple divisions. I knew many members of the Times senior team, including the family. But over time, you kind of get a sense of there are certain things you want to try, certain things you've been thinking about, etc. And I felt Bloom would give me that platform. And I felt there were very few entry points into VC or the startup world which would come as conveniently as Bloom did, because they knew me, they kind of be chatting about it. Everything else would be through a conventional hiring framework where I would always be at a disadvantage. So those were factors which went into it. Like with all venture decisions, the downside was low and the upside was high. And which is always a great decision making framework to have. You want, when situations present themselves like this, you don't want to kind of say no. And this was one of those things where the downside seemed like pretty low risk, and the upside was incredible. So that's really my decision making framework. Yeah,
And you mentioned a little earlier that yeah, you need a brand, right? So what was Sajith Pai brand when you entered into uh,
yeah.
venture world?
No, it's a great question, and I always feel that if when you present yourself to a VC firm, if it's fine if you are in your early 20s, say you've studied in one of the good undergrad institutions, IITs, NITs, BITS, whatever, SRCC, Stephens, and then you've worked 2 3 years in consulting, and you didn't have done any startup. You don't need to have startup exposure, and then you can apply as an analyst or even an associate. It's fine. I think at that point, brand. I mean, your brand is like your pedigree to an extent. The signaling that you do through your work experience, etc. And the firm's really buying you for your brain power. But as it gets older, as you get into your 30s, etc., then I think the firm is also buying you for many other things. Firms essentially buying you for like driving leverage, or driving access to certain networks. So if you are like a founder who's done a startup, sold it, then you bring that experience. You can counsel other founders within your portfolio. You have enough relationships within the ecosystem. So a firm will take a chance on you and say you can come in as a principal or a partner, whatever happens. At my level, so when you're in your, and I would kind of say in some senses you and me are both on same sides. We've kind of built brands for ourselves through creating content in the space. So I used to write a lot, and I think that had a lot to do with how attractive I was to a venture firm like Bloom, because I've been writing systematically since 2012. And Karthik later told me that they used to kind of share my articles internally with folks, etc. Because I written on ethic opportunities. I used to kind of analyze various opportunities, etc. So certainly, I think if you are like me, if you are from a like a unconventional background for a venture firm, not in one of those hot startups, or not in a VC firm, not in the financial world, then I think it makes sense to kind of double down on certain aspects. Whether it's like launching something like a podcast, whether it's writing, whether it's evaluating. These are great entry points because they show how much you care about the startup world. They show how serious you are about it, how much investment you put it, and I think it's a great signals to have. Yeah.
And you mentioned about writing, right? So what are your habits, patterns around note taking, learning, and writing?
Yeah. So note taking is an interesting one. We could talk for hours about it, and So over a long period of time, I've come to the conclusion that it's the process, not the tool. So whenever there is now let's talk about Rome research, for example, and I think it's just good to not get distracted by shiny new toys, Rome research, Notion, etc. So I do all my notes in Apple Notes. And I remember you talking to Gaurav Munjar, and Gaurav Munjar said, I have like 8,000 Apple Notes, or something like that. And I said, wow, great. So, so all my notes are Apple Notes, and really it has to do with why I take notes. And I think that's the most critical thing. I take notes to remember. Okay, sometimes if I'm having an interesting conversation, for example, I capture it on Apple Notes or text editor and just paste it into Apple Notes. Um, Two, I kind of want to reference it later. So Apple Notes, the search is reasonable, you know, and so I'm really more of what I call a piler. I just type, not a filer, really, you know. So I just type out these notes and just put it into Apple Notes. But and I search for it later. So, but I put a lot of these things like quote on X Y Z or something like that. And sometimes it's good to kind of go back if I'm writing a particular article, then I can always go back and search on those keywords and I can see if it's useful or not. So, like for example, I'm writing a particular thing on strategy, and let's say it comes to two-way doors and one-way doors, and I faintly remember that Bezos had written something about this. Then, I mean, if I have that quote, it's also easy to search it on the internet. But sort of like this. So for me, notes is really about. I mean, I take notes to remember in a meeting, and I take notes to reference later. So I really feel that I think the true superpower in note taking is actually not the tool, and not even the process of note taking. It's having some regular cadence or frequency to access these notes later. Because when you access these notes, and like after 6 months, 3 months, you just start going through your notes. You start seeing, sometimes you come across very interesting things, and that to me actually is, if you can build a process by which you actually go back to your notes, that's a true superpower. So to me, notes is not so much about the process, not so much about the tools. It's not so much of the process of writing notes as so much of the process of accessing notes. This is how I think about it, and different people have different perspectives. Yeah, this is mine.
And you are, what a word comes again and again in our conversation is process,
Yeah,
right? So you have been building your brand like a process
yeah,
from 2012 by writing articles. The note taking for you is a process, right?
yeah.
So is this how you approach your investment theses, also building thesis around markets and building thesis around some companies
Yes.
which you are into?
No, it's a great question, Siddharth. Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, if you were to go back to the, if you go to Bloom and internally ask them, and some keywords for Sajith, like the tag cloud for Sajith, process certainly would feature in one of them. And I think certainly one contribution I'd have made is to kind of try and work on some of the processes within Bloom. And yeah, investment. So yes, I try to be systematic about the process, and I think there are broadly two ways in which you can kind of approach investing. One is to kind of build a great network and wait for inbounds. And I think, to be very honest with you, I think almost every single great investment decision typically is inbound. It's not outbound. It's when I say that, what I mean is that it, it, it does happen that someone may say, hey, I want to do something on, let's say, fertility tech, or I want to do something on HR tech in the space of LMS. And then someone goes reaching out, etc. Uh, and then finds something. This does happen, but it's rarer in early stage. In early stage, typically whatever thesis you make, and recently we did this edtech thesis, and I told Radhika, my colleague who worked with me on the thesis and did much of the heavy lifting, that Radhika, it's completely fine if the edtech thesis becomes useless 2 months later, 1 month later, and it will be, because founders are not waiting to read. Great founders are not waiting to read edtech thesis, because every thesis looks backward, does look forward, but predominantly looks backward. So I would say that at the early stage, it's good to have a strong thesis. It's good to have a forward-looking point of view, but it's very dangerous to kind of get tied down by it. So the map is not the territory, and it all great founders, nobody reads your thesis and decides. They launch companies out of a deep desire to correct some friction or do something, right? And so when Gaurav Manjal started in 2015, or for example, one of our successful entrepreneurs, Mukul Rostagi and Baswat started, for example, Class Plus, they didn't read investment thesis. They didn't look at what VCs are saying. They just said there is so much friction here. Let's go and build an interesting product. Dekhi jayegi, And I think so. I think all of what you do and all of what I do as an investment process, my writing, my thesis, is to really make it easy for great founders to reach me. What I want to say is that if you're a founder, reasonably senior founder, wanting to start something, not even reasonably senior, if you are a passionate founder wanting to start something in edtech, then certainly they should find that they should be able to reach out to Sajith, because Sajith thinks about edtech. And even if I don't want to raise from Sajith or Blume, because there may be somebody else I want to raise from, but at least I think a 40 minute conversation with Sajith will be interesting enough. So if I can kind of be position myself like this, then I think I will get. Uh, I think at least access to 70-80% of the investment opportunities in edtech, maybe more. And I think this is what the process that I follow is to do with. It's to do with a certain amount of kind of thinking forward and writing it out. It's a certain amount of tweets that I do. So all of it. So this is really the process. But fundamentally, all of it, if I don't get tied down by the fact that all of this has to directly lead me to something. Uh, it has to create the conditions for serendipity to happen. That would do so. All great investment opportunities come out of these serendipitous circumstances, and what you're really doing is creating the conditions for that to happen. Yeah. So that's
One great thing you said, Sajat, is the map is not the territory. So, however, how much planning you do around the sector,
yeah,
or you mentioned how much notes you take around a sector,
yeah,
you will something find you will extraordinary out of your bounds, which you didn't think about.
absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah,
If you're open to it,
yeah,
right, you will get the opportunity,
completely.
uh,
Yeah.
whether you are an investor or an entrepreneur.
Correct. Just having a prepared mind and not getting stuck by what you have thought through previously or not. Yeah. So having strong views, very weakly held, is I think a great advantage to have in our business, in the investment business, especially in the early stage business. Yeah.
And you also mentioned before, we started recording the podcast that whatever you write on LinkedIn or as your blogs, you might not agree with it after 2 months.
Yeah. No, so yeah, so there was wonderful saying about this Nasruddin Hodja story or something like this. Someone told me that someone asked Nasruddin Hodja at like 10 a.m. and it could change the character, what the time was, and he said like it's 10 o'clock. Somebody asked him in the afternoon what the time was, at 2 o'clock. So somebody told him, why are you telling me different times? So I think, but and he said like you're asking me at different times. So that's the point, that if you come and ask me now something, and if you come and ask me like 2 weeks later, I might have a different point of view. And I think I genuinely feel that not. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm a hypocrite or that I kind of change my stance conveniently, but it's just that I think having a perspective is important, but not being tied to the perspective is actually equally important, because there's so much information that's coming, and when you kind of create that perspective or when you create that hypothesis, you just have limited information, and and when you have new information, and why would you not kind of change that perspective or kind of improve that perspective? So that to me seems like a sin, and I think a lot of the effort that I do plan a lot, but I actually don't end up. I don't think I end up using much of those plans. So planning is great. The plan is useless. And I think I didn't say this. I think Dwight Eisenhower said this. So yeah, in similar vein, yeah. So I think that's probably what I think, Siddharth. Like, no, I can double click on this if you want, but yeah, this is
No, no, really appreciated when you said, strong views, weakly held.
yeah. So yeah, I mean,
So coming to,
yeah. Go on.
your, your investments at Bloom, what are the sectors you look at, and what are the companies that you are working with closely or have led at Bloom?
Yeah. So EdTech is clearly the most critical one that I lead at Bloom, because also the hot sector right now. Media, I've kind of slowly reduced my interest because I've been struggling to find good opportunities there, and there's another colleague who kind of looks at it now a lot more than I do. So this edtech, so agri, edtech and HRTech go together. Is agri. Then there is marketplaces. Then I do look at martech and adtech. So sort of, but the primary one is really edtech and agri, or primary ones are rather edtech and agri. And so so in edtech we have class plus leverage. Then in agri marketplaces we have Procol, which was very involved in at the early stage. Um, uh, there are a few stealth mode investments. Then, of course, I also have two other companies that I handle, which are really from the previous fund. Which when an investment professional left, they kind of moved it over to me. But these are the ones I would have led, Siddharth. So, Class Plus, Leverage, Procon, broadly.
And some of your also the companies on Bloom which you are working closely are, I think, Future of Work and Frap and Rocketium.
Yeah. Frap is something that I handle directly. It's and there's Tap Chief as well, which is like Procol. So Karthik is on the board of Procol, and he kind of runs it, and I kind of co-lead that with him. Similarly, there's Tap Chief, which I kind of support Sanjay on. So Tap Chief is actually a very exciting play that we have in Future of Work. So Frap and Tap Chief are the two future of work plays, and Rocketium is slightly different. Rocketium is uh, e-commerce SaaS, helping companies personalize and optimize on video and graphic units, used by a lot of e-commerce as well as like video, like anyone content companies. So that's Rocketium. Rocketium is an interesting one. It's not something I would normally have led, but due to but it's hugely interesting. Lots of learning because it's a pure SaaS company. So it's so that way it's been very useful to have this diversity of companies because I get to learn a lot. Yeah, yeah,
So these are some wonderful companies, but certainly speaking about edtech,
yep,
Bloom has done really well in edtech.
yes,
You were the first investors in Unacademy,
that is true.
and you have participated in 6 rounds like
Yeah,
continuously
yeah.
in Unacademy. Today, the company is at 1.2 billion valuation in the recent round, and if we also measure by revenue, they are doing phenomenally well, which Gaurav has said some of us public conversations, like they are doing 80 to 100. They'll be like achieving 80 to 100 cr. uh, am I right?
I can only reveal what Gaurav has revealed. So they're doing extremely well, and I think the last round. I mean, they will get to the kind of numbers that you mentioned in
Yeah,
valuation. But the last round was the General Atlantic and Facebook led $110 million round, which valued them at
yeah,
510 million post.
yeah,
Yes, we invested in them from the first round as part of the seed check, and then we've
yeah,
stayed invested. And that's really a deal that Karthik led. Karthik's huge conviction in the space,
yeah,
and I think primarily his conviction in the space was computer in every pocket, and he sort of saw education, health, and fintech as the new roti kapda makan for fund
yeah,
two. And out of that, he said, like, when he heard Gaurav's pitch, etc., he saw it as there's a computer in every pocket, there's a mobile phone.
yeah,
Anyone who wants to think mobile first in education, I kind of have a strong view. And many, and Gaurav, of course, now he's a force of nature, formidable, one of the great entrepreneurs who's come out of India. But
yeah,
at the time, of course, Gaurav was very different. But Karthik saw promise in the team. It was a
yeah,
good team, and Roman, of course, who had left IAS to kind of start this. So
yeah,
we saw believers, we saw very passionate actors, and he bet on this. And
yeah,
it's something that it's a tiger, and we've ridden the tiger, and it'll do well. It's one of the great edtech companies of a generation, I feel. And
yeah,
so being on the Unacademy board for a while, and Singh has given Karthik, and of course I've come from a different perspective. I helped launch a university, so I know I studied education from the other side, kind of an operator, and it's given us a lot of perspectives, and it helps that has helped us get access to great entrepreneurs. Class Plus has done very well for us. It's a very intriguing SaaS come marketplace play, which has got a lot of love from the investors. and they're doing very well post COVID because they're helping all these tuition centers go live, live classes, and they've done very well. Leverage, for example, was a very differentiated play. Very Hatke, very passionate founder, one of the great founders, Akshay, was building a very interesting business. And so it's given us access. There are a few more stealth ones which I can't talk about, but so edtech is one area in which we have strong views. We have lots of not always right. We've got a lot of things wrong. So and what happens is typically when you talk about successes, you don't talk about failures. But there are a lot of failures. And the edtech thesis, for example, we have one slide on all where we chronicle all our successes and failures, and we have far more failures than successes. So we get a lot of things wrong. All VCs get a lot of things wrong. So yeah,
But edtech has also seen, the I see the kind today's tailwinds as vacuums created in the market by the current situations. For example, students are don't have access to physical coaching classes, so that's why they're looking for tutors online. And Unacademy has done a wonderful work. I think the best in the country right now to bring the best of tutors from all across the country onto their platform and build a very strong brand around it, which they have been investing from very early. So that kind of vacuum just the audience latches onto it. That's what my
so
thesis is. Similarly,
interesting thesis. Interesting. I like the way you talk about it as a vacuum. Very nice. Go on. Yeah.
and similarly, the parents who have the other vacuums, I believe, are currently in the market because so many things which would take 10 years to happen have happened in a span of 6 months,
Yeah.
right? Right, the COVID lockdown,
Yeah. COVID is a
China
time
app ban.
machine. COVID is a time machine. It takes certain industries forward by 3, 4, 5 years, and certain industries backward by, which is PVR, for example, or
Yeah.
everyone backward by so many years. So COVID is a time machine, and you're absolutely right. Vacuum is a good perspective, a good way to look at it, Siddharth, if I may allow.
And Sajid, the China app ban has left 200 million active users of TikTok
Yeah. That's another
on,
vacuum.
on Google Play Store, and
Yeah.
that's why and they're trying out various apps to which can give them a similar
Yeah.
taste of
Mm.
TikTok,
Mm.
because these are not your Instagram users or
Mm.
Facebook,
Mm.
right? So there's another huge vacuum of 200 million active users in India of TikTok, which are fueling the likes of the current apps which we see in the market,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
Metro,
Yeah.
Chingari.
Chingari. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So and in coming back to EdTech again, talking about vacuums, parents, who are especially in IT job, I would say around millions of parents in India have, and both husband wife working, have 10 to 12 hours of job a day, right? And now they are working from home. Earlier they relied school served a dual purpose: educate the child and also keep them occupied at school so
Daycare.
that parents
We'll say
work.
daycare products as much as education products. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Right, and these schools kept their children busy, and now parents are out of options, right?
Correct.
These kids are at home, and the parent have the second challenge that they want to limit the screen time, because screen is not good for kids, even for adults screen time is harmful beyond a certain, and we are talking about young eyes here.
Correct.
So there is another vacuum which we see,
Correct.
right? The third kind of vacuum, which I believe is for fitness enthusiasts. You call yourself a fitness enthusiast.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I've read it from your blogs.
Mm-hmm.
And fitness enthusiasts relied on fitness centers who gave them daily dose of discipline
Mm-hmm.
and workout. Now
Mm-hmm.
these are also stranded, and these guys are looking at workout for home options.
Mm-hmm.
So my next uh, question to you is, what are the other kind of vacuum you are seeing? Because what happens is certain markets get built over a period of time, but these black holes or vacuums, when they get created, they accelerate everything. Whoever it is, they don't create about what is the quality of entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
A, B, or C.
Yeah.
If you are at the right place at the right time, and the vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
you are in the vacuum, right? You're building for it unconsciously, because these happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other vacuums you believe are there in the market right now?
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think this is a great perspective, and I think it's a good way to look at it. I think one of the things you need to double click on this is it a temporary vacuum or a permanent vacuum? Like
Yeah.
so does something change intrinsically? So I think certain things are temporary vacuums, like kids K-12, all of the jump in the number of online classes, online class apps that we're seeing. It's good. Some parents will certainly use it, but a lot of parents who see these classes as quasi daycare or time for kids so that I'm free. Like parents used to take their kids to like ballet classes or like French, whatever language classes, and then they used to take an hour and a half free and have coffee or meet someone, etc., or do their shopping, etc. So school. So don't forget that all these extracurricular classes are also quasi daycare opportunities, which suddenly now, if parents have to sit with the kids have to be at home. Suddenly you can't go out and do much. So that sense, I think, especially in tier one, maybe the maybe some of the larger tier two towns, I think some of this bump up may be slightly temporary, but even much smaller towns, they may allow it because here it's solving a permanent access problem. They historically never had access to a ballet class or, I mean, or something else, something like a coding class, for example, so which is coming online. So I think I would actually look at that. Is it actually enabling access to non-consumers? Because of COVID, do you have courage to launch a fully online product which you wouldn't have launched earlier? And because of that, suddenly you're seeing appetite from historically non-consumers. So I think then it's a kind of a permanent good thing. Otherwise, temporary vacuums, you want to be a little more careful, because people are going to get back to some semblance of normalcy. Like for example, there is a vacuum in restaurants now. People are not able to go out and eat or drink. You know, people are making do with either cooking at home or they're making do with ordering and mostly cooking at home. But at some point this will change. People do want to go out, people do want to party, etc. So I think movies, for example, I think people will want to go back to a certain kind of experience. But what kind of movies they want to watch will not matter. Maybe it'll become more spectacle movies. So I would say that uh, I don't think there are any very many too many obvious vacuums beyond the ones you cited, because they are to do with kind of gaps, I would say. The big vacuum, I would say, it's still not really solved for, and I think beginning to see interesting attempts at it are interactions and friendship, and because on dating apps now you can interact online, but you can't complete the loop. So to that extent, I kind of wonder what is being done, and we begin to see a lot of interesting, all the lunchclub.ai apps, etc., coming into make all these serendipitous friendships, etc., happen. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think there are too many vacuums beyond what you've said, or I can't instantly recall. But I would say that while this is an interesting perspective, I also want to kind of, if I were to invest in a company which was solving for this vacuum thing, I really want to see that are they solving for a temporary or permanent one? And in the permanent one they are solving, are they solving problems of access for historically non-consumers? So fitness is an interesting one. I think I'm not 100% sure. Is it the new normal or this? So I genuinely remain confused because I think people do want a social experience. People do want to work out with kind of others. It's as much social. It's a place to make friendship. It's a place to see. But they're also bringing in certain consumers like yoga people, like yoga classes, maybe you really maybe or meditation or something like that. So it could kind of create new sets of consumers there. So that is how I would think about it, Siddharth. I don't know if you have really answered your questions, and I think certainly not able to recall. But if in the course of this I recall, I'll come back to it. But this is really how I think about this. But it's a useful perspective to have. Yeah.
But certainly you believe, because you are so much bullish about edtech, that edtech is a permanent vacuum, right? The kind of opportunity that's offering.
Yeah. Yes and no. So yes, it is a reasonably permanent vacuum because it's also bringing in non-consumers, people who don't have access. So for example, in smaller towns, COVID has spurred that kind of be also because of geo and digital. They've anyway been consuming Unacademy, Vedantu, Topper, but a lot of the content became free, and they got to kind of taste some of this. What was typically paid for earlier became free. Two, I think because they were forced to suddenly not go, and they started looking at some of the content, and they found that this content actually good. This content is better than anything that we'll get in our hometown. Like if you are in Satna, for example, I mean, these are towns where I don't know how many cafe coffee days there are or how many flyovers there are. I mean, two markers of modernity I look at. So maybe there are. So there, I mean, typically if you had needed good JE or NEET coaching, you would go to Bhopal or you would go to Gwalior or the nearest town. So now suddenly you're able to kind of get access to an academy, Vedantu, Topper, all of this good content, and I think it sort of spurs. And yes, it, where it solves for access for non-consumers, I think it's a great model. I think COVID is it sort of spurs that thing along. COVID is a catalyst which kind of makes that happen. Forcing function is a favorite word of mine. So COVID's a forcing function that enables non-consumers to consume. But in fitness, I'm not sure if fit, but I don't know. I could be. I'm happy to change my views, like I said, because CureFit, Healthify Me in our portfolio has begun to do well in these. So let's see what happens. But if it solves for a non-access to access problem, I'd be happy to change my tune. But yes, EdTech, I think predominantly it is creating, it is solving for access, and there is a genuine vacuum. It is kind of, yeah.
So these are the obvious ones because we have seen them playing, over a period of time, and we
Yeah.
are seeing the results in the last 3 months. What are the things you think in edtech are there, which others are not observing, or the spaces which you have a belief in, but there is no company at a huge scale which is doing it, which also creates opportunity for you to invest at early stage.
Can't give all my secrets away. But sure. So I think the dilemma for me has always been to do with market size. So anything which serves a large mass of consumers, it's mobile first. It fits into the existing consumption patterns of edtech, which is really about test preparation more than learning. It's typically easy to say that yes. So I mean, the class, and these are the biggest beneficiaries have been in this. Byju's is of course slightly more of a learning product, but now it's getting into preparation as well. But all the others which have done really well have been in the like like whether it's Unacademy, Vedantu, Topper, all of them have come from test prep, grade up. All of these have come from test prep as well. Beginning to see the first wave of learning tech products. So whether it's Lido Learning, then there's Mastery, then there is, for example, so companies such as these, which are in the learning space, in coding, for example, you had White Hat, Camp K12, etc. So beginning to see focus on beyond test prep, and it's especially been surprised by White Hat's performance. It's been exceptional, kind of, for them to hit this 40 million run rate or whatever we are hearing. And of course, they are the perfect storm of affluent parents, kids at home, coding, which is kind of like the new math, um, COVID, all of that helped create that perfect storm condition, and they've benefited from it. But I'm kind of interesting to see, and I think the next wave will be what I call distinct products. Like there is India 2, which will be products which really solve for access, and at India 1, products which kind of bring in, kind of go beyond just academic preparation to these non-academic things. So could be new ways of organizing hobby classes, for example. So I don't know, I kind of look at, is somebody organizing this kind of all of these non-hobby like hobby classes space, for example? Is there like a systematic way to kind of access that? Is there somebody enabling discovery in that space? That would be kind of interesting ones for me to look at. And I keep looking at that. Preschool is an interesting one. And I feel that as we have more and more of um, so what we are seeing in edtech is education historically had a strong bundle. So school is a perfect example. It's daycare, it's learning, it's socialization, right? All three together. You can't go to a school and say, hey, I don't think the socializing is a good thing. I don't want my kids to socialize with any of the other kids, so I'll only pay for learning and daycare. Like, it can't happen. But in edtech, you can actually do that, because if you're doing online, you're largely paying for the learning, right? Maybe a little bit of the socialization, but certainly no daycare. So will we start seeing products which bundle these back, which will become like friendship for kids or daycare for kids as a separate thing? Will we start seeing like what Wonder School or is like which enables parents to, for example, set up quick daycare institutions like within the society? Like, I'm a mother, and like I keep observe all facets of safety, and I want to earn a little bit of extra income. So I know that parents don't want to go and give their kids to large daycare centers, etc. So you leave the kid with me and go. I look after them for 8 hours, 9 hours, because you're part of the society and the people like us. So can such products come up, which is daycare as a service, socialization as a service for kids? So what I'm saying is, earlier you'd never think of giving only one part of the bundle. And so the bundle of education had daycare, state signaling, which is like, a kind of institution you're from, or completing it signals that, oh, you had the ability and intelligence, socialization, meeting friends, network, etc. So today, if you just bundle out thing, and of course learning can come online, but what about the other parts? Who's taking care of the other parts? So if all of us are studying online, how do we make friends anymore? So is there a way to kind of add back socialization or daycare as parts of the bundle back? I don't know. These are things I think about a lot. Don't have easy answers, but this is one part I think about. Yeah,
And how do you think about moats, especially in the sectors you are uh,
yeah,
interested? And
yeah.
some of the companies you invested in, what do you think are the moats? Are
So So yeah, moats is an interesting one, and I think about it. It matters and it doesn't matter. So I think at very early stages, you shouldn't worry so much about moats as much as the consumer friction you're solving for. If the consumer friction is compelling, then in the consequence of operating, you will gather enough data which could become a moat, or you'll become a compelling brand which is a moat, or you'll become like a marketplace which is a moat, etc. So I think at the early stage, I think we shouldn't think about moats. We should certainly put it in the marketing material to sell our funds to other investors. So I certainly make sure they put that. But I never think about moats, because I feel like So maybe at the early stage, not having a moat is a moat. Because paranoia is a moat. And certainly speed of operations could be a moat. But these are hard for other people to understand. So I think typically in edtech, I think consumer data, user data is a moat, especially if you have someone, for example, who's on that. Like, for example, take Doubtnut. I don't know how they think about this, but if I'm on Doubtnut and I query X number of things and I have doubts, and if Doubtnut is able to aggregate that into a pattern, then that's a moat, right? They know that Sajith comes, looks at probability, looks at organic chemistry, these subjects, looks at cell ka this thing, and Sajith is weak in all these aspects because he keeps asking doubts on all of this. User data is a mode today, tomorrow. Like, if you're able to kind of serve me that data, that thing, etc., that's very valuable. So brand is a moat as well, because brand stands for multiple things. We forget that, but for a lot of consumer brands, brand, you go in and you don't have, look, when you go to buy a soap, you don't have so much energy, or buy coffee, you don't have so much energy to keep researching things. Brand is a huge mental shortcut. So that's a moat as well. And certainly in education, I think some assurance of outcomes is certainly linking it to outcomes is a moat. If you're able to, for example, for upgrad, for example, if they're able to get you 2 to 3 interviews, that'd be a terrific moat as well. So I think these are ways to think about, but I also feel that we shouldn't overdo this moat thing, because if you're solving a huge consumer friction, uh, how you solve it compellingly will in itself become your moat, because the process will become a moat. And I think all great companies like Amazon is a great example. I think it's moats, of course, are, I think, over time the operations. I think it's relentless focus on operations. Prime is a moat, etc. But when it started out, it was no different from any of the other companies, right? So I think other than for software products, it's very hard to come up with network effects or this thing as a moat. It really is your process which becomes a moat, etc. That's how I think about it. I mean, happy to change my views, but yeah.
And Sajid, coming on to your 2 years of investing
Yeah,
now,
sure.
once here now we have discussed about
Yeah.
the portfolio and the themes and diving deep into it.
Hmm.
What have you unlearned in the last
Ah,
2 years as an investor?
yeah. So I really surprised by how much companies can change, how much the idea can change from week to week. Sometimes you invest in a company and like over the next 10, 12, if it's very early, 10, 12, 15 days, it can change from one to the other. And kind of, kind of, we have this kind of a troika of factors which matter in early stage. Markets, products, teams, and I kind of think that I'm markets first, but also feel like in the early stage, I mean, if like typically great founders can actually bend gravity, so they can actually kind of create, they can actually pivot, they can rethink many aspects of it. So fundamentally, I think much as you believe in market sizes can be created. And I think I've kind of learned to be a lot more humble about not reading too much into what the product is very early, because the product evolves, and great products can create large markets. So sort of, I think the biggest thing is not to look so much about the initial business model, initial product. Worry about the problem thereafter, and if the problem is big enough and the consumer friction is massive, and worry about the team. What is in between, don't worry, help them, because if you look at it, the problem can change, the problem that you attack can change, the attack vector can change, etc. Right? If it's the teams will evolve. Okay, you don't have a guarantee of that, but people learn. Founders learn incredibly fast. That's what I've been astounded by. Like month to month, they can learn so much. The product can evolve much faster. So of all the three, I think the product can evolve the fastest. Team the second. The third, of course, is the toughest, which is consumer behavior or consumer friction. That evolves the least. So I think so. This is how I kind of think about some of these aspects. And I would say that the biggest thing that I've unlearned is, don't worry about the attack vector. Worry about the size of the problem. The problem. Don't worry about how they're solving for it. That can change. Maybe that's not even important at this stage. Don't worry about the product. The product will evolve. The product will change. As long as you're convinced about the team and the problem thereafter, the friction thereafter, if it's large enough, how the market is defined, that matters. And in many cases, you don't even know what the market thereafter is. Like when Uber came in, there was so much confusion about what the market is. So great products also end up creating great markets, massive markets. So all in all, I would say I think biggest unlearning has been around the product. That don't take the product as is. Don't take the revenue model as is. Just don't give it too much importance. Yeah, this is this.
So, Sajid, that's an interesting take, I would say. But as an investor, do you obsess about markets? Because if it's a large market today, everyone would know about it, right?
Yeah,
But uh, what I have
yeah,
observed, doing so many podcasts with investors, is there an obsession that what will the market of future,
yeah,
and who is creating that,
yeah,
right? And because investing is also about reaching there first,
yeah,
right? Getting in the best company first.
yeah. Matters.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we obsess over it. Like, so for example, I mean, the one way is to look at certain things. Like, for example, broadly, if you are now investing in a mental health startup, I would say it's not a bad idea, because I think a lot more people are becoming open, especially in our circuit, about accessing mental health. And going to a mental health will be the new going to a spa for a massage. So it's like the mental equivalent of a massage. So it's not a bad idea. Now, who will do well? I don't know. So you now the market is there. It's not very large, but you're hoping it will grow. But now the attack vector matters. How who the approach matters here. Second is there's certain things you don't even know what will happen. Like so there it's much harder. So what do you not know that you don't know? And there you have to wait for the entrepreneur to come and say, hey, this is. So I don't know. Like for example, I'll give you a bizarre example. Like someone would come up and say that we may eat, for example, protein from kind of like this is artificial meat, right? So someone could say that I'll make protein from insects or something like that, and people will be eating it. Don't know. 2030 will we be eating like this? 2040 will be eating like this? Don't know. In these matters, it's much harder to estimate market size. And I think here, I think you're really then again coming back to the way the problem is defined, the reasonableness of success, and the team. Here you're really betting on the team. So I think it's good to be obsessed by markets, but the problem is again the map is not the territory. It's easier to estimate markets for known problems, but known problems, everybody knows, right? I'm not the only person who knows about mental health. Every VC will probably have some thesis there. कि, हाँ, ये grow हो सकता है. So if it's a good founder, like which is why whether it's a Zomato founder or whether it's one of our founders, they've all launched products in that space. So the I think the tougher thing is the markets which we don't know are big, and how do you systematically come up with some process or formula to tap them, or at least tap founders who want to work in them. So yeah.
I think we are it's not an answerable question.
Yeah, I think it's yeah. So I think I would say like look at consumer frictions, and I think the way to estimate market is to look at proxies or consumer frictions. Like for example, uh, are there things that you're doing which are like via media, etc. So I mean, I don't think it's not very easy for me to kind of come up with ones because specifically it's hard to figure out some of these things. But certainly, for example, if there is a particular the consumer friction that's particularly large, like I don't know. So say in B2B, for example, one of our startups, Procall, is really after the entire friction in the procurement chain. Okay, so it's a large friction for that industry. It's a very sizable friction for that industry. And in consumer, there may be another friction, which I don't know what it is. Like for example, so if it's if it's a large enough friction, then I think there's a lot of pot of gold at the end of it, and can you as long as you can capture some of that value. And I think these are ways to see when you come across a problem and when you come across a startup, and what they're talking about seems like a large, like typically very large this thing, then there is scope for it. Yeah.
Because I think VCs are themselves looking for founders, especially you have mentioned in your articles, Karthik also mentioned in the podcast a while ago, that you are looking for founders who are obsessive about the problem they are solving or the consumer they are solving for. So I'm trying to look from that lens,
Yeah. So
trying to find a VC who is obsessive about a
yeah.
certain market or insight.
Correct. So I think it matters because so if you take a particular consumer friction or a problem, you need to be obsessed with it to keep attacking it from multiple ones. So because the solutions will invariably not be right, you know. But if the problem is big enough, then I would say that if the problem is and you're attracted by the problem enough, you will keep persisting so that eventually you kind of succeed. And I think our worry is that if you kind of define the problem too narrowly, and for example, it's always good to kind of look at health, like Healthify Me and say, It's about living better. I mean, defining it more broadly, living better through better eating, better access to food, access to better food rather, or even fitness now, which slowly kind of coming in. If you define the problem very narrowly, then you're limited by the market size, market opportunity clearly. So, so I would say that yes, I think Bloom. That's one of our thesis areas. How is there? How big is the problem thereafter, and how obsessed are they with it? Is there strong founder market or founder product fit? Is the founder right for the space? So those are things that we look at as well. Yeah,
Now, so just coming towards the conclusion of the podcast,
sure,
right?
sure, sure.
So you mentioned earlier also in your blogs that you joined a VC firm in late 40s, which is very unconventional, and coming from a non-founder or a non-VC background.
Yeah,
What do you think your advantage is? Because even VCs are building themselves as modes.
yeah,
Like there's a brand Sajith Pai,
yeah.
but once a founder is there with you and you are mentoring him,
Hmm.
what is your advantage as a VC?
So it certainly helps that I've seen how large companies function, which I think it's a good trait to have because a lot of our founders are selling into those companies as much. It's also good to kind of. I've also seen the Indian consumer evolve, and I've seen sharp discontinuities. So I'm confident that if I've seen some of these sharp discontinuities, then I know that I can take certain leaps of faith. I think so. These are some of the advantages that I bring. Also, I think it's good to have, even if you're a VC, a certain functional skill. And I think my functional skill, it's certainly not very sharp, but sort of at the junction of at the conjunction of marketing, business strategy, sort of corp dev, some aspects of it, sort of are hugely helpful to my founders. And so this is something that I'm able to give because I've worked for so many years, etc. But I also think that beyond a point, you should not overthink it. I'm stunned by how young the founders are, and it's certainly something I've spoken about. That you can actually spend days here, in the venture world, and not meet someone above 30. Of course, there are older founders too, not denying that. And I think there is a lot of unlearning needed to be done in that perspective. That 90% of what you think and what you sing are typically wrong. Wrong because the context is different, uh, 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 and your context was different. You worked in a large company, and when I say large company, I'm also saying large tech companies like Amazon, Microsoft. These are as process oriented as some of the other analog companies. So they move slowly in a very process oriented fashion. I don't know, maybe Google is somewhere in between. so uh, so I would say that it's while it's good to have some of these things that I mentioned, which is ability to see patterns, understanding of how large companies function, some functional skill set. It's also not too. It shouldn't depend on that too much. I think ability to kind of just not see everything on first principles also helps because you are actually in a very 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 different world now. Yeah, hope that
So
helps.
there's a book called Range, Sajid. I don't know if you have read it.
I have read
It's
it. Yeah, yeah, I have read it.
by
Yeah,
David Epstein, and
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
says that you know, uh, don't fear to arrive too early,
yeah,
because once you have like varied experiences and you're continuously exploring,
yeah.
that is what make what is ingredient of best artist. They
Correct.
just kept on exploring and didn't
Yeah, yeah.
achieve for mastery for day one.
Yeah, so range is my story. So and I heard about range and I said and I went through it, and I think, but it's a lot of it is accidental, and just had this really curious mind. Never could settle on one thing. Always, I mean, never could specialize in anything. I was always this kind of in any company that I worked in, any division that I worked in at times. Always this interesting guy. They would pull into meetings, when for so I always kind of paid the price for that of having a very curious, unsettled, distracted mind. So there are advantages, but there are disadvantages too. And so yes, I think range is my story as much. And I really enjoyed reading that book, though I actually enjoyed reading David's previous book a lot more. Like this, yeah. So yeah. So Sunny can't recall what it was named, but yeah. So yeah. So this one was very interesting and absolutely right. Range is in some senses your story and my story too. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sajid. It's been awesome experience and a wonderful experience having you on the podcast.
Thanks, Siddharth. I really enjoyed this. This is one of the great podcasts of our startup world and ecosystem. Uh, really good stuff, and I'm glad and privileged and honored to kind of be your guest this time. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Grateful for, for your words, Sajid. Thank you so much.